Welcome to the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio. I'm your host, Ian Kelly. It has been an amazing week of sports ball. I mean, you have MLB spring training kicking off right now. You're having teams in the Cactus League out there in Arizona, the Grapefruit League out there in Florida. It's amazing for baseball. Baseball fans, I know you're happy that it's back, and we're going to have a lot of fun with baseball season as the time goes by. For basketball fans, you're getting the best of both worlds right now. You have the NBA. You have that towards the end of the regular season. Playoffs are going to be around the corner. And make no mistake about it, when it comes to the NBA playoffs, everyone's going to be on their feet watching the NBA playoffs. You also have been having March Madness, an incredible March Madness, the reason why it's the best postseason in college basketball. And honestly, the best postseason in sports. It's so unpredictable. It's exciting. It's entertaining. College basketball, March Madness. I have not been able to take my eyes off of March Madness. By the way, I want to give a short congratulations to St. Peter's, the 15th seed. Look at those Peacocks. They beat Purdue. They beat Kentucky. They've had to beat the best of the best in their bracket to get into the Elite Eight. So props to St. Peter's real quick. Wanted to give a quick congratulations to them here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio with your host, Ian Kelly. Of course, in the NFL news, you've had the NFL offseason, something we're going to be very importantly discussing on this episode 4 of the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio with your host, Ian Kelly. You've had the big blockbuster trade with Tyreek Hill going to the Miami Dolphins for not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 draft picks. The Kansas City Chiefs, Miami Dolphins making that type of deal, it really shows you the landscape of the NFL today. So you've had that situation going on, and you know what? For anybody who is in the racing circle, anybody out there in the racing world, Bahrain was last week. You had the incredible finish with Charles Leclerc out there in Ferrari picking up the victory. They're going to be in Jeddah and very soon in Formula One. You are going to have another exciting round of Formula One and the news that they're going to be expanding into the United States. So props to Formula One for adding another race into Formula One into the United States in 2023. And then in the NHL world, you have 15 games left in the NHL regular season. We'll talk about this later in the show, but there is a lot of interesting back and forth. There is a tight battle in the Western Conference. The Eastern Conference is more about the seeding at this point, but the Western Conference, there are 11 teams battling for the playoffs. You have pretty much 6 teams battling for 3 spots in the Western Conference. It's going to be exciting to see the final 15 games of the NHL regular season. Getting into the NFL offseason, here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, we are going to focus on the NFC North. We are going to discuss a very important team, a team that has been dominating, a team that has been making its dominance and its footprint on the NFC North for the last 5,000 years, and that is the Green Bay Packers. I understand that the Green Bay Packers organization for a good amount of time has been the bread and butter. They have been the vocal point of that division, but it might not be that same way. As a matter of fact, it seems like for the first time in forever, the Green Bay Packers have lost an offseason. It honestly seems like the Green Bay Packers organization has taken 1 step forward, but has taken 2 steps backwards. And when it comes to Green Bay, when it comes to that organization, understand that this Green Bay Packers, there's a lot of interesting back and forth dialogue we're going to get into here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio. I'm your host, Ian Kelly. But the first main discussion, the first roundup, and the first, close ender of the conversation that we had last week about the Davante Adams trade is this. And that is the aftermath, and more importantly, the ripple effect that the Green Bay Packers and trading Davante Adams had on the NFL. The fact that Davante Adams got traded to Las Vegas caused more dominoes to fall in the NFL. The fact that Tyreek Hill got traded for 5 draft picks and, more importantly, became the highest paid wide receiver a week after Davante Adams got traded to Las Vegas is telling. It also is really interesting when you compare the Deshaun Watson situation, because that happened nearly 24 hours later. There's been a lot of reports that have come out saying that the Green Bay Packers and the Las Vegas Raiders making that trade was kind of the catalyst for the remaining 3 trades that happened after it. If Davante Adams and the Raiders didn't make that trade, it didn't show how much draft capital it's going to take to acquire an elite player in the NFL, you wouldn't see the trades you have seen for the past 48, 72 hours. So that's the first part. So the Packers trading Davante Adams caused a ripple effect and caused everlasting changes to the NFL offseason. More importantly, them trading Davante Adams has allowed multiple players on the Packers to not be there anymore. Letting go of Davante Adams, trading him away to Las Vegas, means that there are certain players from the 2021 Green Bay Packers who are no longer going to be there. Like center Lucas Patrick. I mean, this is a guy who signed with the Chicago Bears. This is a guy who has played almost every single game over the last 2 seasons in Green Bay. He could be a guard, he could be a center, but understand that when it comes to losing Lucas Patrick, him going over to the Chicago Bears organization, it just tells you that Green Bay has lost a vital piece of that depth on the offensive line. Losing a big boy like Lucas Patrick really tells you all you need to know about what's happening in Green Bay. So you trade Davante Adams, one of your main offensive linemen in terms of depth goes to Chicago, and now you're going to have to rely more on John Runyon. You have to rely more on Josh Myers. You have to rely more on Royce Newman. There's going to be more that they are going to have to deal with out there in Green Bay. Let's also discuss the fact that they also had Sullivan, one of their main defensive backs from the recent Green Bay Packers organization. He signed with division rival. He goes to the Minnesota Vikings. So understand that with him being a slot corner, him going to Minnesota, I get it. They got Rasul Douglas. You also have Jair Alexander. They drafted Eric Stokes. There is a chance that he could be replaced. But the fact that they have gotten some depth on that defensive backs that have been taken away, the depth on the offensive line has been slowly taken away. And the fact that they also lost a guy like Billy Turner, who went to the Denver Broncos, who beefed up their offensive line this offseason to help Russell Wilson by going from Aaron Rodgers to Russell Wilson this offseason. That means that the Green Bay Packers now have lost 2 big guys. They've lost 2 people that part of that meat wall in front of Aaron Rodgers to protect him. So throughout a 17-game season, it's going to be questionable to see if, since they have a left tackle, it's no longer there, since they have a center who is not really there anymore, it will be a good situation to see if Aaron Rodgers is really all by himself, or was it having a solid offensive line, one of the reasons why he has done so well throughout his career. There's also been a discussion that he has been very solid in his career because of the targets that he can get to his receivers, because the amount of talent that he has had at his disposal at the receiver position. You've had your Davante Adams. You've had your Jordy Nelsons. You've had your James Jones. You've had your Greg Jennings. You've had your Donald Drivers. There have been solid receivers during Aaron Rodgers' tenure. And honestly, I can't remember any time period during the 14 years he has been in the NFL that Aaron Rodgers has not had an elite wide receiver in the NFL. So you trade Davante Adams, 2 of your offensive linemen go someplace else, you lose some depth on the defensive backs, and the report that came out very recently about Marquez Valdez-Scantling going to Kansas City as a free agent, him leaving Green Bay to go and join Patrick Mahomes. That means that Aaron Rodgers now does not have a number 1 and does not have a number 2 wide receiver. That means that the Green Bay Packers organization has only Allen Lazard and Amari Rodgers as your 2 receivers. Understand the Green Bay Packers have no longer their number 1 and their number 2, and having St. Brown leave and go to the Bears as well as a receiver. You might catch on to a trend here. They lost their center depth to the Chicago Bears. They lose one of their wide receivers as one of their weapons. He goes to Chicago. So when it comes to the Green Bay Packers, they have lost talent. They have lost people in their organization that are vital to them. But there is one player with the Green Bay Packers organization. There is one player on the defensive side. Ooh, it's going to hurt. There is one player that they could not afford to lose. There is one player that they honestly needed to keep at all costs, and they didn't get it done. And that is linebacker Zadarius Smith. All right, Zadarius Smith was a really key starter for the Green Bay Packers in the past. Yes, he had an injury last year. It sidelined him for a while. But understand that when it comes to Zadarius Smith and what the numbers he put up in 2020 and his impact he has had in the locker room out there in Green Bay, that's going to be a crushing blow. And the fact that him going to the rival Minnesota Vikings and making them better tells you that the Green Bay Packers are gradually getting worse. Losing not 1, not 2, but a trio of your wide receiver depth. Losing 2 of your key offensive linemen. And losing a good linebacker in Zadarius Smith to a division rival. That's what we're talking about here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio. I'm your host, Ian Rickelli. Now, my angle with this is you have to understand that there is some more players in this organization that they have not signed yet. There are members, very key members, of the 2021 Green Bay Packers organization that they need to make sure either A, come back, or B, they find a way to get them back. So understand that when it comes to the Green Bay Packers, you have Tyler Lancaster, who has been an average defensive tackle, but it's about depth. How many players are you going to lose in terms of depth with this organization? Dennis Kelly, who's another offensive tackle, another person that is part of that meat wall in Green Bay. You've already lost Billy Turner. Are you going to be willing to let go of Dennis Kelly and face the ramifications of having Aaron Rodgers run for his life on every single play? Kevin King might not be the most favorite person in Green Bay, don't get me wrong, but he still adds depth to that defensive backs. Kevin King might not be a guy that Green Bay Packers fans trust, but he is somebody that has brought another body to that room. He is somebody else who's been able to help build and or support the Green Bay Packers organization over the last couple of years. And the last key important person is Whitney Merciless. Now, he was a really good linebacker for the Houston Texans a couple of years ago. They brought him in as a veteran in the locker room. And it will just be interesting to see if the Packers bring him back as a veteran role, or if they're going to let him go and have not 1, not 2, but a trio of linebackers leave that locker room out there in Green Bay. So, talking about the Green Bay Packers here on the Sports Angle and PR Connections Radio, I'm your host, Ian Kelly. We're going to go to the chat. We want your voice to be heard. And here's what the chat says. The best part of NCAA March Madness is that teams that you cannot imagine would be there is there. You know what? I agree with you on that. I understand that it has been a really interesting March Madness, and thank you for that comment. You also had the Raiders should be non-stoppable with all the trades and new hires. Many of the new players come here to just play with Derek Carr. So, sounds like the Raiders are making the moves around Carr. Obviously, this is in Las Vegas, Nevada, the sports entertainment capital of the world, where the Sports Angle and PR Connections Radio is based. So, let me say this real quick. The Raiders organization has gotten better. But how much better has the organization gotten compared to Denver? How much better has Las Vegas gotten compared to Los Angeles? And more importantly, how much improved has Las Vegas gotten to where they compete head-to-head with Kansas City? That's really the question we need to be asking here. Has Las Vegas made enough moves to compete head-to-head and hold their own? Aaron Rodgers is so good that he can block for himself, throw, and catch his own passes for touchdowns. Understand that he is not Michael Jordan. Understand that he is not Speedy Gonzalez. Understand that this is not a guy who can just go down the field, put it up in the air, and then run super quickly. I mean, he's not Barry Allen. All right, he is not the Flash. Understand that when it comes to Aaron Rodgers, he has to have help. And that's what he's had for the majority of his career out there in Green Bay. That is what he has had with this organization. So the first part of it with the Green Bay Packers was to break down what they've lost. Once again, they've lost 2 offensive linemen with Lucas Patrick and Billy Turner, left tackle, and a center. They have lost a trio of wide receivers. Davante Adams is gone. Marquez Valdez-Scantling is gone. And St. Brown is gone. You have also lost some guys on the linebacking side like Whitney Merciless, Black, and Smith have all left to go someplace else. And you have lost some members of the defensive backs with guys like Kevin King and with people like the situation that's going on right there. So understand that when it comes to the Green Bay Packers, we've talked about what they've lost and my angle on the fact that this amount of losing and this amount of players leaving the organization is not a good thing for Green Bay. Because you have to look at what they have made this offseason. You have to look at what have they added to this organization. Understand that I've talked about what they have lost, but now I'm going to talk to you about the transactions that they have made with this offseason. Because interesting enough, this is a NFL, and more importantly, this is an NFC North that has made a lot of free agency moves. Understand that when it comes to the NFL free agency and what's going on here, understand the Green Bay Packers and what they have done. That's going to be really shocking to some of you how little the Green Bay Packers have done in bringing people in. Now, the first thing that they have done is bringing over Jarran Reed, defensive tackle from the Kansas City Chiefs. I understand that having Reed replace the defensive tackle in Lancaster, I understand that there is some interesting back and forths that are going on right there. I get that. But also something you have to understand is that when you replace one average defensive tackle with another defensive tackle that's average, are you really getting better? Or are you just replacing average with average? Because Reed with the Seahawks last year and with the Kansas City Chiefs during his tenure there as well, understand that Reed has been a defensive tackle who really hasn't shown any splashes. I mean, he's really not someone who is a flashy defensive tackle. So you really have to wonder with the Green Bay Packers organization, what is the game plan? What are they really trying to accomplish with bringing him in? The second thing the Green Bay Packers did this offseason was re-signing their slot wide receiver and Allen Lazard to their team, making sure that Allen Lazard stays with the Green Bay Packers organization for the foreseeable future. Now, you could poke the bear and you could make the argument that signing Lazard and letting go of guys like Marquez Valdez-Scantling is a good thing. All right, you could make the argument that because Lazard is a wide receiver that was in the slot, he's going to get his targets, he's going to get his touches. It was a solid move. But my question is, why haven't you brought in a more established wide receiver? Why is it that the Green Bay Packers organization up to this point has not pulled the trigger or has not put their stamp down on any of the wide receivers that are still available? Because, make no mistake about it, the 2022 NFL offseason, the wide receivers who are currently free agents, there's a good amount left. As a matter of fact, there's a good amount of wide receiver free agents who are still on the board, and you could sign them as we speak. I'm not going to go through all of them, trust me, but there are a couple that you can look at and you could say, you know what, I think that if you bring them in, you try to bring them in on a reduced salary, you try to bring them in on a cap-friendly, maybe, just maybe, this could end up being a beneficial thing for the Green Bay Packers organization. Let's start for starters. Let's talk about somebody like Julio Jones. I mean, Julio Jones, multi-time All-Pro, multi-time Pro Bowler. Julio Jones at one point in the NFL was one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And he's a free agent at 33 years old. You also have T.Y. Hilton, another veteran in the NFL. He's been there for a decade. T.Y. Hilton has been a Colt for his entire career, but he has shown that he can be a reliable wide receiver. He has shown under guys like Andrew Luck, Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz even, that if you have a solid quarterback that he can toss him to, T.Y. Hilton will get open. So you have T.Y. Hilton, you have Julio Jones, you even have Marquise Goodwin if you need some speed on the inside with the former Chicago Bear, Marquise Goodwin. One who isn't going to cost a lot, provides veteran leadership. How about a guy like Allen Hurns, who has been with the Dallas Cowboys, he's been with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He has just turned 30. He is someone who could provide veteran leadership, and he is still available on the free agent market. And then the final two I'm going to mention are the high-priced ones, and that is Jarvis Landry and Sammy Watkins. All right, Jarvis Landry, when he broke into the league, he had an incredible beginning of his career. Jarvis Landry looked like a stud. He was a 10 wide receiver. He goes to Cleveland, shows a little bit of regression, but at 29 years old, and a guy who's had multiple 1,000-yard seasons, he has done okay for himself. And Sammy Watkins is the biggest question mark of all time, because when he was with the Baltimore Ravens, organization, he showed flashes of that potential that he had in Buffalo. When he was at Kansas City, he was a perfect number 2 for Tyreek Hill. Watkins was in LA. He provided a solid number 2 out there at the Rams organization. Understand that Sammy Watkins is a guy who has been someone that you can put as a number 2, a guy you can put on the outside, and he'll get you a decent amount of catches every single year. He'll get you a decent amount of receptions every single season. So, understand that when it comes to the Green Bay Packers, there's about 4 or 5 wide receivers that they could go out and get. So that's why I'm really questioning, is Allen Lazard and Amari Rodgers all you have? Are you trusting Allen Lazard and Amari Rodgers to be your long-term future out there in Green Bay? Because you have to understand that this 2022 organization looks completely different from the 2021 organization who dominated the NFC North, had one of the top seeds in the NFC, and lost to San Francisco 49ers in the NFC divisional round. Understand, this is a Green Bay Packers that has lost a lot of depth and does not have a lot of foundation to back them on. So, when it comes to the NFL and when it comes to the world that we're looking at right now, the Green Bay Packers didn't add much this offseason. They didn't re-sign that much this offseason. And they actually made pay cuts to running back Aaron Jones and their best tackle on the team in David Bakhtiari. So they've had pay cuts. They've had trades, re-signings. So to end on this, here on Sports Angle on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media, my angle on the Green Bay Packers in 2022 is that this team is going to show a slight 2022 Green Bay Packers organization is going to take a step back in terms of dominance. This Green Bay roster is not built to win 14 games next year. This organization is not being assembled to be a powerhouse in the NFC. So my angle with Green Bay to start out this show, to start out the first half hour of this show, is that the Green Bay Packers in 2022 is not going to be the dominant team that beats up on the doormats of the NFC North that you have seen for the last 7,500 years. The Green Bay Packers are going to take a step back, and if you're a Vikings, if you're a Bears, and if you're a Lions fan, you have to be aware of this. If you're in the NFC and you're a team like the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys out there in the NFC East, if you're a Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the NFC South, and when it comes to the NFC West, with how stacked the NFC West is, you really have to ask yourself, with Green Bay taking a step back, is it our turn to establish our dominance? With them taking a step back, is it time for the rest of the NFC to expose Aaron Rodgers for who he is? And who is Aaron Rodgers, you might be asking? Aaron Rodgers and the Packers organization, they choke when it matters the most. Aaron Rodgers is not reliable when you need him the most. And Aaron Rodgers cannot get the job done by himself with Green Bay. So this 2022 upcoming season is going to be eye-opening for the league. And it is going to point up some eyebrows in the NFC North. Now, we're going to go to the chat real quick. We want your voice to be heard here on Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio. Remember, they are veterans. Are they too old? Well, you got to understand how Green Bay works. The Green Bay Packers are not the most flexible when it comes to cap space. The Green Bay Packers are not an organization that has a wealthy owner that can spend millions and millions of dollars and just forget about it. In fact, the Green Bay Packers organization is owned by you. The Green Bay Packers are owned by the fans. They're owned by the people. Remember that. So there's a reason why Green Bay, outside of Reggie White and outside of Charles Woodson, they do not get the best players in the NFL at 25, 26, 27. There's a reason why the Green Bay Packers in the offseason do not go out and trade and get the best running back, get the best wide receiver. Well, they trade the best wide receiver. There's a reason why they do not build up their offensive line by getting the highest paid offensive line in off-season. Because they are owned by the people. And the people are not someone like a Khan in Jacksonville. The people are not like Kroenke out there in the Rams, where they have so much money hand over fist that they can afford to spend $100+ million on a wide receiver. As a matter of fact, that's been one of the main reasons why players leave Green Bay, is because they are one of the smallest markets in the NFL. They do not spend a lot of money in the offseason because a lot of times they can't afford to. And when it comes to Green Bay and when it comes to what they do year in and year out, a lot of times they're willing to let stars go in order to build new ones. They're willing to trade a great player on the banking that there's going to be another one coming very soon. So, as we were talking about the Green Bay Packers here on Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, for the first half hour, we talked about the Green Bay Packers. We talked about what they lost this offseason. We talked about the very minimal things they have added this offseason. And now it is time to move over to the rest of the NFC North. Because somebody did say, is this the Bears' year? Is this the season where the Green Bay Packers fall and the Chicago Bears come to rise? Well, I'm going to answer this with a two-part question. With Green Bay struggling and with Green Bay taking a step back, which team benefits from it the most? The Minnesota Vikings or the Chicago Bears? What team gets put in a prime seat to be the best of the best in the NFC North if Green Bay shuts down? Who is an organization that is reliable enough to where all they need to do is win 9, 10 games, and they are in a perfect scenario to win that division? Because understand, the Minnesota Vikings and the Chicago Bears want Green Bay to lose. Minnesota and Chicago would be more than happy to see the Green Bay Packers fall and slip and trip and not be the dominant force they have been for a long time. And understand that the Chicago Bears, with what they've done this offseason, have shown people that all you need to do and all we need to do is bolster up our missing pieces. Understand that when it comes to Chicago Bears, they have gone with depth over detail. Understand that when it comes to Chicago Bears, they have gone with quantity over quality. And there's actually a reason why I think the Chicago Bears organization is going to benefit from having Green Bay fall down. There's a reason why I think the Chicago Bears will be able to blossom with the organization and what they have done this off season. Now, understand that the Chicago Bears added not one, but 2 wide receivers who were overlooked in their current organization. They brought over Byron Pringle from the Kansas City Chiefs, the special teams guy, the person that brings speed to the wide receiver room. He is going to be a valuable piece, and honestly is going to be a valuable part of the Chicago Bears in 2022. So Byron Pringle, that speed and that elusiveness, that is going to be a vital part of Chicago. Also getting St. Brown from Green Bay, once again, it adds depth to that organization. It adds the amount of people that they're going to bring in to Chicago. And more importantly, when it comes to their wide receiver room, once again, there are 65 wide receivers who are still unavailable. Understand that there are 65 wide receivers on the free agent market who are unsigned and they haven't been claimed by a team yet. So do not be surprised if the Chicago Bears add to some of those names. Do not be shocked if the Chicago Bears are an organization that adds a Julio Jones. Do not be shocked if the Chicago Bears go out and acquire a Jarvis Landry. Because when it comes to the Chicago Bears, they are focusing on depth over quantity over quality, pretty much. So now we're talking about the Chicago Bears here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio. They also went out, and like I said before, went and got Lucas Patrick, an offensive lineman from the Green Bay Packers. There's also the same organization who drafted Cody Whitehair. This is an organization who last year drafted Taven Jenkins. So you have Jenkins, you have Whitehair, and now you have Patrick. So as long as they continue to build off of that, they are going to be fine. Also on the defensive side, adding Justin Jones to your defensive backcourt, understanding that Justin Jones essentially replacing Khalil Mack, Akeem Hicks, replacing, Blyle Nichols, who went to Las Vegas Raiders. This is an organization that is trying to add to what they currently have. You have Robert Quinn, who was a sack master last year. You have Mario Edwards, who came from the Raiders. You have guys like Justin Jones, and you have Zadarius Mack, the little younger brother of Khalil Mack on that team, and you still have Roquan Smith. So when it comes to Chicago Bears, I'm not saying that they're going to dominate the league, but I'm saying that the Chicago Bears organization, the Chicago Bears are going to be able to add a few more wins this year because they have added on the depth of the organization. But I want to know from all of you, when it comes to Chicago Bears, do you see them capitalizing on Green Bay's mistake? Do you see the fact that the Green Bay Packers taking a step back like they have, that is going to allow the Chicago Bears to take advantage? And before people say, what about Minnesota? Well, let's talk about them for a split second. Yeah, they bring over Harrison Phillips from the Bills. They bring over Jordan Hicks from the Cardinals. And once again, Zadarius Smith from the Packers. The Minnesota Vikings have beefed up their defense. They have re-signed Kirk Cousins. They have re-signed Adam Thielen. An organization like the Minnesota Vikings have done something very smart. They have brought in the right pieces, and they have re-signed players who want to play for Mike McDaniel. So the Minnesota Vikings are going to be solid. The Chicago Bears are going to be solid. And Green Bay is going to be what Green Bay has always been. So it's a possibility, and I'm going to say this on record. It is a realistic possibility that the NFC North will have a trio of teams make the playoffs next year. It is a realistic scenario that you see the NFC North do what the NFC West did last year. It is a realistic possibility that you will see a multitude and multiple teams in the NFC North get to the playoffs because of the 7 seeds that are there. The 2022 NFL Draft, it is on its way. It's going to get here sooner than later. There's going to be a lot of question marks surrounding the 2022 NFL Draft. Understand that when it comes to the NFL, when it comes to what we're looking at, this is an organization And this is a move that happens every single year. 32 teams add brand new players to their organization. It happens. You have 250 plus players who join the league, and you have about 200 players who exit the league every single year. Now, the 2022 NFL Draft, the positioning have changed thanks to trades recently. There's been teams who have traded out of the first round. There are teams who have traded back in to the first round. There's been a lot of movement. But there's a question I want to answer on this show. There is an answer that I honestly want to talk about when it comes to the NFL Draft. And that question that I want answered is, what team is in the best position in the draft? Who is an organization that is going to be in such a great position that they are going to be able to capitalize on it, and they're going to be able to benefit off of the mistake of the team above them? Who is going to be an organization that is going to be doing so handy at the 2022 NFL Draft? Because there's an organization with the second overall pick who I actually think is going to be getting the best player in this draft. There is someone that I actually believe is going to be the best person in this draft. Understand that Aiden Hutchinson, he is the number one pick in this NFL draft. All right, it is between him and it's between the guy. And Aiden Hutchinson, the defensive end from Michigan, he seems like a potential face of the franchise. He looks like a guy that you can put on your defense, and you can put Trevor Lawrence on your offense, and you can sell out season tickets out there in Jacksonville. You also got to remember that you're putting Aiden Hutchinson and Josh Allen, who you drafted with top 10 pick not that long ago, on the same roster. So Aiden Hutchinson has pretty much been the number one pick for most people. It has been the number two pick that has been a question mark. Because offensive lineman Evan Neal from Alabama. Evan Neal, the 6'7", 340-pounder from University of Alabama. This is a guy who is a beast. This is a player who has the size, the speed, and the ability to be a great offensive lineman in the NFL. This is a guy who can take an organization and make them better. And more importantly, this is a player that if he goes to the right organization, he could be a superstar. All right, understand that Joe Thomas, understand Orlando Brown, understand Orlando Pace, guys like that, they are superstars at the offensive tackle position. And when I say superstar at the offensive tackle position, I'm not saying that they're going to get record deals. They're not going to get, all these sponsorships being handed to them. Here's what I mean. I mean that when you're a superstar at a tackle, when you're a superstar at a guard, when you're a superstar at a center, it means that you are the best of the best at your position, that you are the best left tackle in the league, that you are the best left guard in the league, that you are the best center in the league, you are the best right guard, and you are the best right tackle in the league. And if Evan Neal shows in the NFL the production that he showed at Alabama, whoever has the second overall pick will be lucky and will be fortunate to get a guy like Evan Neal. Now, there are going to be Detroit Lions fans who are going to have a rebuttal. They're going to say that they drafted Penei Sewell last year. Why would they draft another offensive tackle this year? Why would they, for the second year in a row, draft an offensive tackle with their top pick? Let me explain why. Let me explain to Detroit Lions fans, let me explain to NFL fans why it's plausible. What is the most important position in the NFL? What is the most reliable and honestly the most dependent position in the NFL? What is the one position on the field that if you do not have it, you are going to suck in the NFL? More importantly, what is the one position that if you do not have trust in that position and you do not have the utmost confidence that they are going to do their job, your quarterback and your running back are going to be shaking in their boots every single drive? And no, to answer your question, it is not the quarterback. That is not the most important position on the field. The most important position on the field are the 350-pounders that are blocking for him. The most important position on the field is the position that will open running lanes and generate open space for your 2,000-yard running back. Understand that the offensive line, I've said this on multiple shows, I've said this on this show, the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, that the best Super Bowl champions spent valuable assets on their offensive line. The teams that win constantly are ones who do not neglect the offensive line. Understand the New England Patriots were dominant for 20-plus years because Tom Brady would take pay cuts to make sure that his offensive line was paid. Understand that when Peyton Manning was in Indianapolis and in Denver, he would even take a little bit of a pay cut so that his offensive linemen would get paid. Understand that the quarterbacks who know how to win make sure that their boys are being taken care of. Those running backs who are running for 2,000 yards, 1,500 yards every single year, there's a reason why they always encourage their offensive line to get paid. Because they know that is the most valuable and the most important position in the NFL. You don't have it, you do not win. So Detroit Lions, you have Penny Sewell. All right? You have Penny Sewell, you have him on your offensive line. That's great. But let's look at the rest of your offensive line. Let's look at what the rest of your line looks like out there in Detroit. Because understand the Detroit Lions organization could be in a perfect position here. Understand that the Detroit Lions having the second overall pick might just be the most valuable and most cherished draft pick in this upcoming draft. All right, at left tackle, you have Taylor Decker. All right, and Decker is somebody who was a former first-round pick. The problem with him, however, is that he cannot stay healthy. Understand that Decker is an offensive lineman. He's been in the NFL for about 8 years now. He just cannot stay. He just cannot stay healthy throughout his career. He's had foot injuries. He's had problems with his lower body. I mean, understand that when it comes to Decker, he is somebody that I say, if you can get rid of him and you could bring in somebody better, that's a possibility. Let's also consider the fact that at left guard, they have Jonah Jackson. Now, I'll give credit to Jonah Jackson. He has been a quality guard in the NFL. In fact, he's been one of the most underrated guards in the NFL. At center, you have probably the best center in the NFL in Frank Ragnow. Right guard is a huge question mark. I don't know if that is a need that needs to be addressed right away, but understand that when it comes to the Detroit Lions, they do not have a security blanket at right guard. And then at right tackle, you have Penny Sewell, who you drafted last year. So Evan Neal being your left tackle to replace a injured Decker, that's a possibility. Because on both sides, you're going to be able to protect your quarterback. You're going to be able to open up for your running back. Because keep in mind that the Detroit Lions have the 32nd pick in the NFL draft. Understand that the Detroit Lions organization could very easily draft a quarterback with the last pick in the first round. And you will look like a genius if you draft Evan Neal to protect a guy like Desmond Ridder. You will look like a genius if you draft him, Evan Neal, with the second overall pick, so you can protect a Sam Howell, so you can protect a Carson Strong. Because understand that when it comes to that organization, them having 2 picks in the upcoming draft, all it tells me and all it's very important to me is the fact that you already have built 3/5 of an offensive line. You have Jonah Jackson, you have Frank Ragnow, and you drafted Penny Sewell with the right tackle. But it is not an insane idea that, hey, if you know that there's going to be a quarterback later in the draft, if you know that you could take one late in the first, you draft an offensive tackle, you draft a 6'7" big guy to protect your newest asset. So that's the reason why the Detroit Lions and that second overall pick is so valuable in the NFL draft. There's a reason why the Detroit Lions have to hit on the second overall pick, and there's a reason why, in my angle with your host Ian Kelly, why the second overall pick is the most valuable and the most interesting draft pick in the upcoming draft. Because the Detroit Lions can get Evan Neal, or they can trade it down and get multiple draft picks in return for a team that needs an offensive lineman. Understand that if you've looked at NFL mock drafts, if anyone's looked at the mock draft the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio has put out, you know that I have the Lions taking Evan Neal, the second overall pick. I have the Texans, the next pick afterwards, getting the offensive tackle from North Carolina State, and then having the Jets take Jermaine Johnson, the defensive end from Florida State, and then having Kayvon Trubadix be from Oregon, having the 5th overall pick, going to the New York Giants. All right, understand that is my top 5. You have a defensive end, offensive lineman, defensive end, defensive end. Understand that when it comes to the upcoming draft, I don't see a quarterback being taken until about Carolina at 6. I don't see a quarterback being taken until about the Falcons at 8. Because understand that the Atlanta Falcons and Carolina Panthers are the first 2 teams that desperately need a quarterback. Understand that Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett, whichever one you prefer, whatever flavor you want, you are going to see both of those quarterbacks be taken in the top 10. All right? You're going to see Kenny Pickett and Malik Willis go to either Carolina or Atlanta. Now, personally, here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, I'm your host, Ian Kelly. With my calculated analysis and based off of what I have seen and based off of what I have read from reports from both of those teams, Malik Willis would be a perfect quarterback for the Carolina Panthers. Malik Willis, the quarterback from Liberty, the quarterback that has kind of lit up the NFL world with his arm strength and his arm accuracy and how far he can throw a football. Understand Malik Willis, yeah, he's only 6'1", but he is a guy who has agility. He's a guy who can run. And more importantly, they have shown that Malik Willis has leadership quality out at Liberty. So I could very easily see the Carolina Panthers taking Malik Willis with a 6th overall pick, and then the Atlanta Falcons finding their replacement for Matt Ryan and getting Kenny Pickett from Pittsburgh. Because understand that Kenny Pickett has his own positives too. He's older. He's been in college football for a couple of years. That means that he is seasoned. That means that he is somebody who has already been established as someone who has that leadership quality, someone who knows how to do his job. So you could very easily see that type of situation develop out there in the 2022 NFL Draft. So talking about the 2022 NFL Draft here on Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, I'm your host, Ian Kelly. Understand that when it comes to the NFL Draft, I am still very high on the Detroit Lions having the most valuable pick in the draft. Now, somebody asked on Twitter, use a hashtag the Sports Angle on PR to engage in the conversation. Somebody asked, can you reveal the rest of your top 10? All right, I'll do that for you. With the 7th overall pick, I say the Giants are going to go after safety Kyle Hamilton from Notre Dame. Understand that the New York Giants, you get Kayvon at 5 to bolster up your defensive line, but then you get Kyle Hamilton to strengthen and to pretty much make your secondary near unstoppable. Understand that with a guy having this much talent, he is not going to slip all the way past the New York Giants. They will find a way to draft him either with the 5th pick or with the 7th pick in this draft. I just talked about Kenny Pickett going to the Falcons at 8. I talked about Malik Willis going to the Panthers at 6. But at 9, I could see the Seattle Seahawks drafting offensive tackle Charles Cross from Mississippi State. I mean, this is a guy who's a 6'5", 310-pound, kind of situation. But understand that the Seattle Seahawks need offensive line help. Honestly, I need offensive line help for the last 5 years. But the fact that Russell Wilson is gone, the fact that Russell Wilson is no longer there, tells me that they can do finally a 5-year rebuild. They can build an offensive line from the draft and not worry about rushing it. So Charles Cross, Mississippi State, he feels like a guy who is a solid pass blocker, and they need somebody that can do that. Charles Cross, I think, would be perfect there. And then with the 10th overall pick, the New York Jets get defensive back Ahmad Gardner from Cincinnati. Understand that they lost Marcus May. The New York Jets have lost depth on that secondary this offseason. So bringing in a defensive back, bringing in a Gardner from Cincinnati is very knowledgeable. And more importantly, is the right thing to do. So, to recap the top 10, since somebody asked here on Sports Angle on 2022 NFL mock draft, if you want to put it like that, here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio with your host, Ian Kelly. Aiden Hutchinson from Michigan will go to Jacksonville at 1. You'll have Evan Neal, offensive tackle from Alabama, going to Detroit at 2. You will have Ikem Ikenu from North Carolina State, going to the Houston Texans at 3. You will have Jermaine Johnson, defensive end from Florida State, going to the New York Jets at 4. You will have Kayvon Trubadix from University of Oregon, going to the New York Giants at 5. You will have the Malik Willis, the first quarterback to go off the board. He will go to the Carolina Panthers at 6. You will have Kyle Hamilton, safety from Notre Dame, going to the New York Giants at 7. At number 8, the Atlanta Falcons will take quarterback Kenny Pickett from Pittsburgh. And number 9 and number 10, you'll have the Seattle Seahawks taking offensive tackle Charles Cross from Mississippi State. And the New York Jets will take Ahmad Gardner, defensive back from Cincinnati. The NFL offseason has been a fun conversation here on Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, but it's time to get into some hockey. It is time to discuss the great world of hockey. because the NHL trade deadline officially is over. It is done. It is out of the way. And more importantly, when it comes to that organization and when it comes to organizations who bought at the deadline, organizations who sold at the deadline, you saw teams that were active. You saw teams that were inactive. You saw trades being voided. It was a very interesting NHL trade deadline. But now it is 15 games left into the NHL season. You have 15 games left in the NHL, and that means that we are going to discuss the remainder of the NHL regular season here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, the voice of new media. The Vegas Golden Knights, that team right there, they are 9th in the Western Conference. They are 1 point back from the Dallas Stars. And when it comes to the Vegas Golden Knights, they might be in the best position to make the playoffs. Understand that the Vegas Golden Knights might be in a great opportunity to take advantage of their strength of schedule and make it as an 8th seed. There's even a chance if they go all the way and they make it perfect that the Vegas Golden Knights could even be a 7th seed if everything goes well. But understand that when it comes to the NHL, when it comes to the last 15 games, this is a NHL season, and definitely I appreciate the support when it comes to the NHL season, when it comes to the last 15 games. The Vegas Golden Knights have everything to lose, and understand that when it comes to gaining, they are in the catbird seat. Now, I'm going to explain to you why I'm saying that. Let me explain to you why I believe that the Vegas Golden Knights are in the best situation to make the playoffs. For starters, in their next 15 games, they are going to take on 10 teams below 500. The Vegas Golden Knights, the remainder of their schedule consists of, and I'm going to say it on air so everyone can hear it, they're going to take on the Chicago Blackhawks. All right, they're going to take on Chicago. That is actually going to be a primetime event. So you're going to be seeing them, who, by the way, are 24 and 41. You're going to have back-to-back games against the Seattle Kraken, a Kraken team that is 20 and 44. You are then going to go and see Vancouver on April 6th. They are 31 and 35. They're 4 games below 500. Then you go up against Arizona, a team that openly tanked this season, and they are 20 and 43. And then after that, after the first 6 games that they are going to have in the remaining schedule, then they go back to Vancouver, take on the Canucks there, before they face their first real competition in the Calgary Flames. Understand, NHL fans and Vegas Golden Knights fans, more importantly, the Vegas Golden Knights have not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, and not 6, but they're going to have 7. 7 teams, 7 games where they're going to take on teams below 500. Understand the Vegas Golden Knights have a real good possibility of going 5-2 or 4-3 in this time span. Understand the Vegas Golden Knights, considering that they're facing off, once again, as I repeated in this segment, when you're taking on 3 of your 7 games against teams who have only won 20 games all year, that is going to make it an easier challenge for you to get into the playoffs. Understand that when you're going up against a 24-win Chicago Blackhawks team who already sold off Marc-Andre Fleury, they sold off guys like Brandon Hagel, they are tanking the rest of the season. They know they're not making the playoffs. That's already been confirmed. Seattle is an expansion team. They've struggled all year. They know they've already been eliminated from the playoffs. Vancouver is on the edge of the postseason. Like, they're barely holding on to dear life for their postseason goals. But with them selling off and them selling at the trade deadline by getting rid of Travis Hamonic and getting rid of certain players, it tells me that they were on the selling side of the NHL trade deadline. So those 7 games are going up against teams that all sold at the NHL trade deadline. To compare, the Dallas Stars are the team they are battling. The Dallas Stars are the organization that is going up against them in this playoff situation. Now, understand that their 7 games, they got to go up against a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs. Understand that the Dallas Stars have to go up against the Tampa Bay Lightning. They got to go up against the Minnesota Wild. They got to compete against the Edmonton Oilers. They got to compete against the Calgary Flames. Understand that the Dallas Stars are going to have a much competitive and a very difficult back end of the schedule for their remaining games. Understand that the Dallas Stars, and yes, I know they're going to go up against Vancouver. They got to go up against San Jose, and I think they got to go up against Anaheim. But in terms of the competition, the Vegas Golden Knights have a easier challenge to get to the 8th seed than the Dallas Stars do. But let's continue the rest of their schedule for the Vegas Golden Knights. Let's see how difficult their last 15 games are. So they're going to have back-to-back games in Alberta. You go up against Calgary, the second best team in the West. Edmonton, if I remember exactly, is I think the 7th seed right now in the Western Conference. So they're going to be on the edge of a playoff spot as well. They're going to be battling for their lives in that game. And then you go up against the New Jersey Devils. They've only won 23 games all year, 23-41. I thought they would be better this year, but unfortunately, the young talent just hasn't come in yet. The Washington Capitals, that is going to be tough because the Washington Capitals are the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference, and they still are trying to battle for a bigger seed and a higher seed in the Eastern Conference at 35-30. So that is going to be a tough matchup. That might be the second tough matchup that they take on this entire time. Then you go up against San Jose. San Jose is 28-38. They've already been mathematically eliminated from the NHL playoffs. And because of what they did at the NHL trade deadline, I'm going to say that they are most likely not going to be the biggest competition for the Vegas Golden Knights. You have Chicago, and then you have St. Louis. So, taking away Chicago, because Chicago is going to be, in Chicago, there's always a factor there. The loudest crowd in the NHL, the most sellouts in the NHL, and the biggest attendance in the NHL. When you go to Chicago, that's not easy. But the last 3 games for the Vegas Golden Knights, you take on the Dallas Stars on April 26th. That is going to be for the 8th seed. I'm pretty much calling it now. That is going to be a game where one team has to win, and the other team's going to go away frustrated when they lose. The Chicago Blackhawks are difficult, and St. Louis is mighty difficult in the playoffs and in St. Louis at the Enterprise Center. Understand that when it comes to St. Louis, Chicago, and Dallas, that's going to be a tough final 3 games. So let's break it down as simple as this. The next 12 games for the Vegas Golden Knights, they're only facing one team that has been guaranteed a playoff spot. There is only one team in the next 12 games for the Vegas Golden Knights who have already wrapped up their playoff spot in the NHL. Unlike the Dallas Stars, who their remaining 12 games, you're going up against Toronto. They're trying to get a higher seed in the Eastern Conference. They're going to be battling. You're going to go up against a team like the New York Islanders, who are still in contention and still are mathematically eligible to get into the playoffs in the NHL. You're going to go up against the Tampa Bay Lightning during that time span with the Dallas Stars. So understand that the Dallas Stars, 5 of their remaining 12 games, are going up against teams that are going to want to win. They have an incentive to win. Whereas the Vegas Golden Knights, only one of those next 12 games are going to be going up against teams that actually has a reason and actually has the incentive to go out and try to win. So for all the people who are anti-Vegas Golden Knights, for people who are against the Vegas Golden Knights, I want you to tell me in the chat down below. I want you to go on Twitter at SportsAngle on PR. And I want you to tell me. I want you to tell me how the Vegas Golden Knights are going to miss the playoffs when they have the second easiest record and the second easiest strength of schedule in the remaining 15 games. Please explain to me how the Vegas Golden Knights are not going to take advantage and they're not going to be like those hyenas in Lion King, and they're going to take full advantage of the situation. Because understand that when it comes to the Vegas Golden Knights, they are right now 35-32. They're 3 games above 500. They are 1 point behind Dallas, and those are points that are going to be highly valuable. Understand that 36-27 is a lot different than 35-32. So, and we're talking about the Dallas Stars and Vegas Golden Knights here on the Sports Angle on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian McKelly. I want to break down one last thing with the NHL. I want to focus on one last conversation because there is something that has caught my eye. There is something that happened in the NHL not that long ago that is needed to be said. Now, very recently, there has been the increase of minor league talent getting put on emergency loan to the NHL. Vegas Golden Knights had a trio. The St. Louis Blues had 2 of them. You also had the Vegas Golden Knights, not that recently, have 5 players at one time get called up to the main roster on emergency. You had also the Edmonton Oilers have 2. The Anaheim Ducks had a trio. Like, there has been teams who have done emergency loans to the NHL. Now, I want to explain to you what that means when they say emergency loan. I want to explain what that actually says when it says emergency loan. Now, an emergency loan, according to NHL.com, an emergency loan is where a team and or organization can call up a player due to emergency or due to a roster limitation and not having enough players to play for said game. So, in other words, to pretty much put it into simple terms, an emergency loan means that if a team will not have 23 members on their organization for a game, they can call up a player from the AHL, put them on the NHL roster as a healthy scratch to fill the 23-man roster. In other words, it means that if you have 9 players who randomly get injured in one game, you can call up 8 players and have them be part of the organization by Tuesday. So you've seen the Vegas Golden Knights take advantage of this, but you've also seen the Vancouver Canucks in the past have to call people from Utica Comets to be with the Vancouver Canucks. You have seen this season with the LA Kings and their counterpart out there in Ontario, where the LA Kings have had injury problems and they've had to bring up people on emergency loan from Ontario. And you also saw the infamous incident that happened earlier this year where the Arizona Coyotes had 11 players that were either sidelined by COVID or were injured. So they had to call up 10 players from Tucson. They had to call up 10 players an hour and a half before game time so they could have an active roster of 23 players. Now, the question has been asked in the NHL, should this be allowed? Should this be a thing that's allowed to do, where you on an emergency loan can call up all of these players and they do not count towards the cap? You can call up all these players on an emergency loan and have them be part of the organization, even if they do not suit up for the team. That was actually a situation that happened a couple of days ago in the NHL. You had a St. Louis Blues player that was placed on the roster from an emergency loan, didn't even play a game, but he was sent immediately right back down. And the reason why that was a controversial situation is because of the fact that Springfield and St. Louis is an interesting dynamic. Understand that it felt like, and most people believe this, that the St. Louis Blues called him up on emergency loan just so he could sit for an entire game and then go right back to Springfield. So the controversial part of it is, should teams be allowed to put players on emergency loan as healthy scratches? Should the ruling be that the only way you could call up somebody on an emergency loan is if you have to suit them up for game time? Essentially, the question that a lot of people have been asking is, should a NHL team call up a player from the AHL on an emergency loan status if they have to play? If they have to actually put on the sweater, they have to lace up their skates, and they actually have to play that night. In fact, I'm going to pass that on to all of you because I understand the rationale. I understand the argument. Because the argument is, why are you going to call somebody, have them fly or have them drive, depending on how close they are, to the arena just so they can have them in street clothes and have them in a box for 3 hours? What is the rationale of calling up somebody to make them a healthy scratch as an emergency loan if you are never going to actually use them for the game? So I want to know, for all people watching around the world, all people who watch the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio, do you agree with the one side who says that the rule book is the rule book and it states that you have to have a 23-man roster and you have to have 23 players present at the arena for game time? Or are you part of the newer generation, or are you part of the different path who says that the ruling should be modified to where the emergency loan should only be used if they are forced to suit up and play as an emergency loan? It's very similar to the emergency goaltender situation. Now, I don't know if some of you know about the emergency goaltender, but if there is a starting goaltender who gets sick, or there's a starting goaltender who gets injured, there will be an emergency goaltender at the arena at all times. Now, it could be the custodian, it could be the food and wellness chairman, it could be a bench coach, it could be whoever. But there's been stories about people who were the Zamboni driver, like David Ayers, who played for the Carolina Hurricanes against the Toronto Maple Leafs because they had to use an emergency goalie. There was like the Foster situation happened in Chicago a couple of years ago, where unfortunately due to injuries, they had to use an emergency goaltender who was an accountant as his primary job, but they had to put him in a uniform and he actually had to play for the Chicago Blackhawks. So that is where the situation lies. I just really want to know what all the people around the world think. When it comes to the emergency loan, should it be treated like the emergency goalie, where if you have to suit up, where you have to put on the sweater, you have to put on your helmet, you actually have to suit up, in order to be an emergency loan? Or should it just be the way it is, which is they have to have a 23-man roster. We will call a person up for the AHL, put him in the press box for 3 hours, and put him in a nice suite for 3 hours, but they technically are a player, so they fit the 23-man roster situation that is required. Now, talking about the NHL here on Sports Angle, I am your host, Ian Rakelli. And with about 10 minutes left here on Sports Angle and PR Connections Radio, I want to stay on the NHL for a minute because the NHL has had an interesting situation. Now, for the people who do not know, the 2022-2023 cap space has been announced. It has been announced that the cap space in the NHL for the upcoming NHL season, there has been some interesting back and forth. There has been some interesting discussions about what will happen for the 2022-2023 NHL season. As a matter of fact, the upcoming NHL season for 2022-2023, there's going to be different regulations. There's going to be all of these different things are going to take effect next upcoming season. And the reason why that is very valuable and the reason why it's very important that we're discussing here on the Sports Angle and PR Connections Radio is the fact that when it comes to salary cap, when it comes to what these teams have to do in terms of the NHL, it really provides you some context. Because when it comes to the NHL, when it comes to their salary cap, the next season is going to shed a light on how valuable $1 million is going to be. Because keep in mind that the 2022-2023 season, you are going to have a max cap of $82.5 million. There's also no potential increase with this $82.5 salary. Understand that this $1 million rise in the ceiling for the NHL salary cap is a huge deal for the NHL. Understand why this is so valuable. Because you have seen teams over the last couple of years get away with having $92 million, $98 million. You saw a couple of years ago a team have $101 million in cap space. Understand that for the longest time, the NHL and the organizations, they have been able to look at their cap space. They've been able to look and been able to generate how much they can go over the cap space. They can go over by a certain extension and get away with it. Now, the current NHL as of today, if the $82.5 million went into effect right now, over half the NHL would be over. Let me say that again for the people in the back. The NHL, if they implemented the 82.5 cap ceiling with no potential increase, that means that over half of the NHL today would be over. The teams like the Vegas Golden Knights at 92.4 million would be over by $10 million. Teams like the Montreal Canadiens would be over by $10 million. And teams like Tampa Bay Lightning, who had $98 million in cap space 2 years ago when they won the Stanley Cup, are at only $89 million this year. Now, the upcoming season in the NHL, the Vegas Golden Knights have $83.6 million in cap space. Understand the Vegas Golden Knights will be over by $1.1 million heading into this next offseason. Keep in mind that they only have 16 signed players to contracts, which means that not only will they be over by 1.1 million, but they also have to either sign or have to bring up 7 players to fill that 23-man roster quota. So for all people who watch the NHL and are wondering why I'm bringing this up to end the show, it's because of how valuable that wording is going to be. Because the Vegas Golden Knights are going to have to shed salary very quick. The Vegas Golden Knights are going to have to dump a lot of salary, and keep in mind, they're not going to be able to re-sign players like Matthias Janmark. They're not going to be able to give extensions to Nicholas Waugh. They're not going to be able to give guys like Nicholas Hague and Riley Smith the contracts they deserve because they are already $1.1 million over the salary cap. Unfortunately, the Montreal Canadiens are almost in the same boat. They have an $80.6 million cap. They only have $900,000 to spend. But keep in mind that they have 9 positions that they have to fill. Understand that this is a Montreal Canadiens team that has guys like Chris Weidman, guys like Alexander Romanov. They also have some really talented guys like Matthew Perrault. This Montreal Canadiens team is going to start running out of money, just like the Vegas Golden Knights are going to have to figure out what they're going to do with their money this upcoming off season. And I brought the Tampa Bay Lightning for an important reason. Because next year, the Tampa Bay Lightning have $82.8 million, which means that $300,000 over the cap, it might not seem like much. But in the grand scheme of things, $300,000 means that they will have to get rid of 1 player. Because, similar to the Vegas Golden Knights and similar to the Montreal Canadiens, they will have to sign 6 players to fill that 23-man roster, and they are already over by $300,000. So the upcoming NHL offseason in a couple of months is going to be fascinating because you are going to see what teams are going to be desperate. You are going to see which organizations are going to dump players on Buffalo. You are going to see which teams are going to dump players on Anaheim, on Columbus, on Detroit, and on Ottawa. Now, don't be surprised or do not be shocked that I said those teams. Because understand that the Buffalo Sabres have only, and I'm going to say this really slowly so you can comprehend this. The Buffalo Sabres only have $40.9 million in salary for next year, which means that they have over $41 million in cap space. Understand that the Buffalo Sabres are going to be cap dumps for teams that have to shed salary. The Detroit Red Wings, Steve Yzerman, they are going to have $35 million in cap space for the upcoming NHL offseason. The Columbus Blue Jackets, and shout out to No Filter Productions, by the way, for this. I know you're a huge Columbus Blue Jackets fan. They're going to have over $29 million in offseason money. So do not be shocked, ladies and gentlemen, and all the people watching around the world. If Vegas, if Tampa Bay, and if Montreal look towards the Buffalo Sabres, the Columbus Blue Jackets, and the Detroit Red Wings to get rid of salary. Do not be surprised if you see a William Karlsson go to the Buffalo Sabres in a cap dump. Do not be surprised if Shea Weber's contract gets offloaded from Montreal and goes to Detroit. And I would not be surprised if the Tampa Bay Lightning look at one of the worst contracts that they have on their team and they try to get rid of it by having him go to Columbus. So understand that that's Brent Seabrook, by the way. So Brent Seabrook, you could easily go to Columbus. You can see Shea Weber go to Detroit. You can see William Karlsson go to Buffalo, because those are bad contracts and they're going to have to get offloaded in order to be under the cap space. So we have a couple minutes left here on the Sports Angle on PR Connections Radio. I'm your host, Ian Rickelli. We have had an incredible show for you. We talked about the NFL offseason, talked about the Green Bay Packers and all the losses and versus their lack of additions in the first half hour. We talked about the Chicago Bears and why they are going to benefit from the mistakes the Green Bay Packers have made this offseason, and why the Detroit Lions have the most valuable and most important pick in the NFL draft in 2022. And then in the second hour here on the Sports Angle of Pure Connections Radio, we talked about the NHL. We talked about the emergency loan, emergency goalie situation. Is it fair? Is it not? And we talked about the recent increase in the salary cap ceiling for 2022 and how only $1 million is a big deal for Tampa Bay, Vegas, and Montreal. So here on Pure Connections Radio, you can watch the Sports Angle on Pure Connections Radio every Friday night, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. You can also watch a lot of great shows on here. You have We Got the Power. You have Defenders of Finance. There is a lot of good creators here on PR Connections Radio. Very talented and really intelligent people here on PR Connections Radio. I want to give a shout out to Guy Dawson and all the people who work really hard here with PR Connections Radio. I also want to say, as we're getting towards the end of the show here, that the next week's show, and we are going to be bringing on somebody who is really knowledgeable about the world of the NBA. We're going to be bringing on somebody who, getting ready for the NBA playoffs, is going to be very detail-oriented, someone who's going to bring you the facts, and more importantly, someone who's going to bring you a different angle to the world of basketball. So stay tuned for next week's episode 5 of the Sports Angle, and that will be for next Friday night, 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. And follow your host at Ian Rickelli18 on Twitter, and follow the show on all social media platforms at Sports Angle on PR. And until next time, I'm your host, Ian Rickelli. Have a good weekend, and stay safe.